a man from Kenya's Rift Valley, he sat in an office in Nairobi in late 2008 and he looked at the East African petroleum market. He decided that he was going to build an oil empire from scratch, meaning there was no refinery, there was no parent company, and there was no multinational backing. His name is Jackson Kiplimo-Chebet, and what he built is Stabex International. January 16th, 2009. That's the date Kenya's Registrar of Companies officially recorded the incorporation of Stabex International Limited. The founders, they walked into the new year with their documents already prepared. The memorandum and articles of association were ready, and the registration fees were paid. They did not wait. They moved on date 16 of the year. The company was incorporated under the Kenyan Companies Act, Chapter 486. That act is the legal foundation that gives a company its separate identity from its owners. Stabex became a legal person. It could own property, it could sue and be sued, and it could enter contracts in its own name. That separation between the company and its owners, that's the architecture that allowed Stabex to become an institution rather than just a personal business. The shareholding structure at incorporation, it tells you everything about who was in charge. 3 shareholders. Jackson Kiplimo-Chebet, he held 925,000 shares out of 1 million shares. That's 92.5%. He was effectively the entire company. This one was not one of those cases of, majority shareholder, in the ordinary sense. The other 2 shareholders, they were just participants in his project. Abraham Kipkoech Korir, he held 50,000 shares. That's 5%. His title was Director of Projects and Business Development. He was the man responsible for turning expansion plans into physical petrol stations. Daniel Kiprop Cherutich held 25,000 shares. That's 2.5%. He was the managing director, the person responsible for keeping the daily operations alive, while Chebet handled the bigger picture. The nominal share capital was 500 million Kenya shillings. 1 million ordinary shares at 500 shillings each. For a company that had not opened a single station, this one was a serious financial declaration. Nansana, Hoima Road. That's the address of where Stabex began. Nansana is a town in Wakiso district, about 11 kilometers northwest of Kampala's city center. It became a town council in 2007, just 2 years before Stabex arrived. It was newly formalized, rapidly expanding, and positioned on one of the most commercially active roads in the entire country. The Hoima Road, it runs northwest from Kampala towards Hoima, Fort Portal, Kasese, and eventually the Democratic Republic of Congo border. Every fuel tanker heading toward western Uganda, it uses this road. Every truck moving goods between Kampala and the west passes through Nansana. Commercial vehicles, agricultural transporters, and long-haul hauliers. What they opened in Nansana was not primarily a retail petrol station where ordinary motorists drive in to fill their tanks. It was a depot, a wholesale fuel depot. Their first customers were other fuel businesses. The company started by supplying Union Energy, Jab Petroleum, and Hashi Petroleum. These were smaller operators who needed reliable bulk fuel. Stabex received product, stored it, and sold it in large quantities to these companies. This is a completely different business model from running a branded retail station. There is lower visibility, much higher volumes, thinner margins per liter, but enormous throughput. Building retail stations immediately, it requires land, construction, licensing, staffing, branding, and retail inventory. All of that costs money before you make a single sale. Starting as a wholesale depot, that means you generate revenue and learn the market before you commit to the full retail infrastructure cost. You study which roads move the most fuel, you figure out where supply bottlenecks exist, you build relationships with logistics operators and government bodies, and you generate cash flow while doing all of this. By the time Stabex opened its first branded retail station, its leadership already understood the Ugandan fuel market from the inside. One more thing about the Nansana choice. The founders, they were not competing with Shell or Total in their home turf. The multinationals had secured the prime sites in central Kampala. Those sites were expensive and already occupied. Stabex moved to where Kampala was growing, not where it already was. I'm talking about cheaper land, less competition, and a road full of exactly the kind of commercial traffic that buys diesel in enormous quantities. Now let's talk about the market that they walked into. To understand why Stabex founders saw an opportunity, you need to understand what the East African petroleum market looked like in 2009. Kenya's fuel market had been dominated by multinationals for over a century. Shell established its first depot at Shimanzi in Mombasa in the early 1900s. By the mid-2000s, 3 companies controlled more than half of Kenya's entire fuel market. Kenolcobil had 19.4%, Total had 17.9%, Shell, it had 14.1%. Those 3, together, controlled over 51% of everything sold at the pump in Kenya. These companies had not just brand recognition, they had physical infrastructure, import terminals, pipeline access, depots, tanker fleets, and government relationships built over decades. Getting into this market as an independent African company was not easy. The barriers were deliberately high. To participate in Kenya's open tender system, a company needed financial capacity to fund a full cargo of refined petroleum products. To lift product from the Kenya Pipeline Company terminals, you needed formal agreements and financial deposits. To build a station, you needed land, construction financing, environmental approvals, fire safety certification, EPRA licensing, and county permits. Each of those steps, it costs money and time. Most people who tried to enter this market in the 1990s and early 2000s, they failed. Local entrepreneurs struggled to get access supply on fair terms. The multinational structure made it difficult for independent players to compete. But by 2009, things were shifting. East African governments, they had been gradually liberalizing petroleum markets since the 1990s. New independent marketers could enter if they had the capital and the regulatory patience. Urbanization was accelerating across both Kenya and Uganda. New roads were being built, new estates were expanding outward from every major city, the boda economy was exploding across Uganda, creating millions of new fuel consumers who needed petrol every single day. Commercial trucking was growing alongside regional trade, and the multinationals, focused on their established premium city locations, they had left significant gaps in secondary towns, peri-urban corridors, and regional transport routes. The Herfindahl-Hirschman index value for Uganda's petroleum market at the time, it was below 649. For context, a number below 1500, it generally indicates a highly competitive, fragmented market. Below 649 means there was genuine room for a new entrant to grow without running into a wall of consolidated market power. The founders apparently understood this. They did their homework. Uganda specifically had another dynamic working in their favor. Fuel adulteration was catastrophic. In 2008, nearly 30% of all fuel sold in Uganda was contaminated. A fuel company that could genuinely guarantee an adulterated pure product, it had an immediate significant advantage. The Uganda National Bureau of Standards and the Ministry of Energy, they launched a fuel marking and quality monitoring program to tackle this. Stabex entered the market precisely at this moment of regulatory reform. They aligned themselves with the marking program, guaranteed product purity, and made that guarantee central to their brand. Now let's talk about the man at the center. Jackson Kiplimo Chebet is a fascinating figure for one specific reason. He built one of East Africa's most significant petroleum companies while maintaining an almost supernatural level of public invisibility. Most billionaires in East Africa, they eventually become media personalities. They give interviews, they appear at business conferences, they get profiled in Forbes Africa. Chebet has done none of this. For years, while Stabex was expanding aggressively across Uganda and Kenya, most Kenyans had never heard his name. What is documented about his business history before Stabex is this. He incorporated Ultra Eureka Farm Limited in February 2002. That's 7 years before Stabex. The company is classified in agronomic and farming inputs. So before he was an oil man, Chebet was in farming. Beyond Stabex, he sits on the board of the Lapset Corridor Development Authority as chairperson of the Strategy and Development Committee. Lapset is Kenya's most ambitious infrastructure mega project. We are talking about a deep-sea port at Lamu, road and railway corridors connecting Kenya to South Sudan and Ethiopia, and an oil pipeline. Being the chairperson of the Strategy Committee of that project, it means Chebet sits in rooms where the long-term infrastructure map of East Africa is decided. By July 2021, the registered share capital of Stabex was 500 million Kenya shillings, divided into 1 million ordinary shares of 500 shillings each. Chebet held 925,000 of those shares. He later absorbed Daniel's 25,000 shares, bringing his total to 950,000. Abraham retained his 50,000. Now, before we understand how Stabex grew, we have to understand how fuel moves across East Africa. Uganda is landlocked. There is no sea access, and there is no domestic oil refinery. every single liter of fuel consumed in Uganda in 2009, it had to travel by road from either Kenya or Tanzania. The primary route was the Northern Corridor. Fuel was imported into Kenya through the port of Mombasa. It was refined or transshipped at Mombasa. Kenya Pipeline Company pumped it through a pipeline, 490 kilometers to Nairobi, then 314 kilometers onward to Eldoret. Road tankers carried it across the Malaba or Busia border crossings into Uganda, then drove 240 kilometers to Kampala. From the time fuel left a tanker ship in Mombasa to the time it reached a depot in Kampala, it had traveled over 1,000 kilometers and changed hands multiple times. Kenya Pipeline Company is the piece of infrastructure that makes the entire East African fuel supply chain possible. It operates the pipeline from Mombasa through Nairobi to Eldoret. It manages the inland depots. Any serious regional fuel marketer must work within this system. KPC is not optional. In Kenya, the open tender system coordinates fuel imports. The government estimates demand for the next month, floats a tender to licensed oil marketing companies, and the winning bidder imports on behalf of all participants. Companies receive product allocations proportional to their market share. Then, product flows through KPC to inland depots from where individual OMCs lift their allocations. In Stabex early years, they were almost certainly not winning OTS tenders directly. They typically start by purchasing product from larger OTS participants who have already won import allocations. You buy at their price, transport it yourself, and sell at the market rate. The margins are tighter than direct OTS participation, but it gets you started. As Stabex grew its volumes and built its financial track record, it would have graduated into direct OTS participation. This is the natural progression of the Kenyan petroleum market. On the Uganda side, every tanker crossing from Kenya had to go through the fuel marking at the border. Uganda's marking system required a chemical tracer to be added to the fuel at customs entry points, including Malaba, Busia, and Mutukula. This marking allowed regulators to verify that the fuel was properly declared and taxed. It also made adulterated fuel detectable. For Stabex, whose entire brand was built on product purity, this system was a competitive ally. We are now at the Equity Bank partnership. One of the most underappreciated decisions Stabex made in its early years was this. It refused to give credit to its distributors. Now think about what that means strategically. Most companies trying to grow their customer base, they offer extended payment terms. Buy from me on 30-day credit, buy from me on 60-day credit. You know, it's a conventional way to attract and retain commercial buyers. But credit terms tie up your working capital. If your customers owe you money, you can't buy the next cargo of fuel. In a business where supply reliability is the entire value proposition, running out of working capital is catastrophic. Stabex made the opposite choice, cash only. And then, they made it work by partnering with Equity Bank. The arrangement was elegant. When a Stabex distributor needed to buy more fuel than their current cash position allowed, Stabex referred them to Equity Bank for a working capital loan. Equity Bank, understanding the petroleum sector and having been pre-briefed about Stabex distributor relationships, it assessed and approved loans. The distributor got financing, Stabex collected cash immediately, and Equity Bank generated new SME lending business. 3 parties, 1 arrangement, everybody won. Within the first few years of operations, Stabex was not just supplying small petrol station operators. It was landing institutional clients that validated its capabilities at a serious commercial level. Kakira Sugar, one of the largest sugar factories in East Africa, operated by the Madhvani Group. A sugar factory of that scale, it runs continuous industrial processes: cane crushing, refining, packaging, and transportation. All of it runs on diesel, enormous quantities of diesel. So there is predictable demand and consistent orders. This is the kind of client that stabilizes your cash flow and makes your supply chain planning straightforward. Then we have the China Railway. Chinese state-owned construction conglomerates, they were actively building infrastructure in Uganda at the time. I'm talking about roads, bridges, and government facilities. Their operations involved heavy construction equipment that consumed vast quantities of diesel. Getting a supply contract with a Chinese infrastructure contractor, it was serious business. Then there's Dot Services Uganda Limited. This is a well-known Ugandan civil works company involved in major road construction projects. It's another high-volume diesel consumer on government infrastructure timelines. And finally, there was Abubakar Construction Limited. This was another Ugandan construction firm. Stabex was targeting clients with large, predictable, recurring fuel needs. You know, institutional buyers who could not afford unreliable supply and who valued quantity guarantees over marginal price differences. These are exactly the clients that generate the volumes a growing distributor needs to scale its operations. The Uganda National Oil Company contract, it was the crowning achievement of this institutional strategy. UNOC was established as Uganda's national entity to manage petroleum importation and distribution. When UNOC launched its bulk trading operations in March 2020, they chose Stabex as their first customer. The formal MOU signing was attended by Uganda's Minister of Energy and Mineral Development, Mary Goretti Kitutu, at Stabex headquarters in Nansana. Stabex delivered 400,000 liters as the inaugural transaction. UNOC's first ever commercial petroleum delivery, it went to Stabex. Being the first private OMC, trusted by Uganda's national oil company with a commercial transaction, that's a statement of institutional credibility that no amount of marketing budget can manufacture. Now we are at the expansion. Stabex went from 1 depot in 2009 to over 70 retail stations and 8 depots by 2019, with 300 million liters sold annually. Then to 150 stations in Uganda alone by October 2024, then to over 200 stations total across 7 countries by 2025. This pace of growth, it didn't happen by accident. The location strategy was disciplined from the beginning. Stabex did not try to compete for the expensive, already saturated premium sites in central Kampala. Those were occupied by Shell and Total, who had bought out smaller players at prices Stabex could not match. The company did something smarter. It looked at where Kampala was growing. Nansana was the first example. Every location followed a logic: high commercial vehicle traffic, growing urban population, strategic corridor positioning, and underserved markets where the multinationals were present but not dominant. The news post analysis from June 2022, it described one of Stabex tactics in Uganda with genuine admiration. They called it the double barrel strategy. Stabex will open stations directly opposite each other at strategic junctions. The effect, it was psychological as much as commercial. When motorists see the same brand on both sides of the road at a major junction, they assume the company is enormous. They assume stability, and they assume supply reliability. The brand feels permanent and omnipresent even before the station count justifies that perception. That's deliberate brand architecture being built through physical infrastructure. The same logic drove their Kenya entry. The company incorporated Stabex International Limited Kenya in 2011. But they didn't start in Nairobi, they started in Eldoret. Now, why Eldoret? First of all, because the founders are from the Rift Valley. They had local knowledge of land, local business relationships, and familiarity with commercial patterns. Second, because Eldoret is the last major Kenyan city before the Malaba and Busia border crossings into Uganda, meaning the road passing through it carries every truck moving goods between Kenya and Uganda. And 3, because Eldoret is the end of the KPC pipeline from Mombasa, meaning a company with Eldoret presence has direct access to product without needing to pay Nairobi terminal costs. And lastly, because land was cheaper than Nairobi's competitive urban market. Now we are at the products. Stabex launched with just 3 products: petrol, diesel, and kerosene. These were the 3 pillars of East African fuel retail at the time. Petrol for private cars and motorcycles, diesel for trucks, buses, construction equipment, industrial generators, and agricultural machinery, kerosene for cooking and lighting in households without electricity connections, which in Uganda in 2009, that was a very large proportion of the population. Diesel was always the most strategically important product. This is because Stabex had expanded along freight corridors, and freight corridors ran on diesel. The lubricants line came next. Stabex developed a branded range called Stabex Lubes, covering engine oils, gear oils, shock absorber oils, brake fluids, and lithium-based greases. The product range is comprehensive, and the strategic purpose is simple. A fleet operator who trusts you for fuel probably needs motor oil as well. A construction company that buys fuel from you also needs hydraulic fluid for its excavators. Selling lubricants through your fuel network is a natural margin-enhancing extension. The LPG expansion was announced on November 12, 2020. Stabex Gas launched simultaneously in Kenya and Uganda, using the existing network of over 70 stations as distribution points. The market context for this decision was extraordinary. In Kenya, 83% of the LPG market, it was untapped. In Uganda, 89% was untapped. 9 out of 10 Ugandan households were still cooking on charcoal, firewood, or kerosene. The public health case for LPG adoption, it was massive. The government policy momentum was real. And the supply infrastructure Stabex needed, its own retail station network, that was already built. The LPG range covered 4 sizes. A 6 kilogram cylinder for low-income households, a 13 kilogram cylinder for standard households and small businesses, which is also the size used in Uganda's government clean cooking distribution program, and also a 45 kilogram cylinder for hotels, restaurants, and commercial kitchens, and bulk bullet tanks for industrial installations. Benson Mwangi, who is Stabex head of supply and business development, he framed the launch in terms of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the global initiative to have 1 billion more people cooking cleanly by 2030. That framing, it was deliberate. It positioned Stabex not just as a commercial fuel company, but as a development partner in a socially significant transition. That positioning opened doors with governments, NGOs, and institutional buyers that pure commercial messaging would not have reached. The government partnership, it followed quickly. By July 2022, Stabex was one of 3 companies, alongside Total Energies and Vivo Energy, distributing the Ugandan government's national LPG kit program. The government was funding the distribution of 13 kilogram cylinder cooking sets to 1 million Ugandan households. Stabex, it was one of 3 OMCs trusted to execute this nationally. The distribution events happened station by station across the country. Places like Busembatia in Mbale City, in communities across Uganda. Then came aviation fuel. October 2nd, 2024. Energy Cabinet Secretary Opiyo Wandayi and Kenya Airports Authority Chairman Caleb Kositany, they presided over the launch of Stabex aviation fueling operations at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. The company had won a tender to supply Jet A1 fuel to airlines operating through East Africa's busiest international airport. The timing of this was not coincidence. The week before the launch, Kenya Airways and Jambo Jet, they had reported flight disruptions due to jet fuel unavailability at JKIA. A cabinet secretary attended the launch because aviation fuel supply at the National Gateway Airport, it's a matter of national economic security. When fuel runs out at JKIA, international news gets written. Stabex had been preparing for this even before the shortage happened. The certification requirements for aviation fuel supply are substantially more demanding than ground fuel retail. JIG guidelines, the Joint Inspection Group standards for aviation fuel quality management, those guidelines require third-party audits of storage, delivery equipment, staff training, sampling protocols, and quality management systems. Stabex had completed all of this. The shortage created the public moment. The preparation had been underway before it. By early 2025, Stabex was operating into plain aviation fueling at both JKIA in Nairobi and Moi International Airport in Mombasa. Jet A1 supply to international airlines, local airlines, and charter operators at Kenya's 2 main international airports. One more notable element in the board composition timing. A director of the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, he had been appointed to the Stabex board, an aviation regulator on the board of a company that was actively building its aviation fuel capability. Coincidence? Let's now talk about the payments ecosystem. Stabex approach to customer payment infrastructure is one of the more sophisticated dimensions of a company that most people think of as just a petrol station chain. The Stabex card launched at a ceremony at Stabex Nansana headquarters attended by General Katumba Wamala, who is a former Ugandan government minister. Having a figure of that prominence at a fuel card launch, that tells you how Stabex positioned the event. This was a statement. The card is a proprietary prepaid fuel card. Customers load money onto it and use it at any Stabex station for fuel, LPG, and lubricants. For fleet operators, the commercial value is significant. Every transaction is recorded with timestamp, location, volume, and price. Fleet managers can see exactly which driver fueled which vehicle at which station in real time. This eliminates one of the most common forms of fuel-related fraud in East African fleet operations, which is drivers reporting more fuel purchased than they actually dispensed. For customers without smartphones, Stabex built USSD-based card management. You dial *274 *10#, you top up, you check balance, you change the PIN, you request a statement. No internet connection is required. And it works on any basic phone. Not everyone is carrying a smartphone. Designing your payment system to work for those users, not just for urban smartphone owners, That's the difference between a system that reaches your actual customer base and one that reaches only the most convenient part of it. In October 2024, Airtel Mobile Commerce Uganda, it announced a partnership with Stabex, allowing Airtel Money customers to pay for fuel directly at any Stabex station in Uganda. Then, in November 2024, a deeper integration was launched, the Stabex card top-up system. Customers could now load money from the Airtel Money wallet directly onto their Stabex card. In May 2026, the partnership extended to MTN Uganda through the Boda Boda Win Kafuta campaign. Kafuta means fuel in Luganda. The campaign helped Boda Boda riders to self-onboard as MomoPay merchants, accepting cashless payments from customers at no cost. Riders who consistently use their merchant codes, they earned daily fuel rewards. The Boda Boda focus here is deliberate. Uganda has over 1 million Boda Boda operators. They fill up multiple times per day. Individually, each purchase is small. Collectively, they represent one of the highest frequency fuel consumption demographics in the country. Converting them into cashless payments and rewarding them for using Stabex system, that builds both mobile money adoption and fuel station loyalty simultaneously. KCB Bank Uganda also formalized a partnership, allowing KCB holders to pay directly at Stabex pumps. And Stabex developed a fully functional Android app. It's available on Play Store. The app includes a GPS station locator, card account management, and an LPG ordering function, which allows customers to order cooking gas cylinders for delivery in the same way they might order from a food delivery service. We are now going to look at Stabex as a brand. Stabex master brand tagline is powering your performance. It speaks directly to the customer as a performer. Your vehicle performs, your business performs, your fleet performs. Stabex is what makes that performance possible. The Luganda language hashtag campaign in Uganda, hashtag Tulibuliwamu, or Tulibuliwamu, I don't know how to pronounce it. Aki guys, please, I'm sorry. That translates to we are always near you. This is culturally intelligent brand strategy. Shell and Total Energies, they cannot put Luganda language messaging at the center of their brand because they are global companies maintaining uniform international brand standards. Stabex can, because Stabex is from here. It's a regional company speaking the language of the region. The sub-brand architecture is clean. Stabex fuel for the petroleum products, Stabex gas for LPG, Stabex lubes for lubricants, Stabex card for payments, Star Cafe for the sit-down food offer at select stations, and CB Mart for the 24 hours convenience retail stores. Each sub-brand carries the parent name, so every product sold reinforces brand equity in every other category. Now Stabex, it has 3 certifications: ISO 9001 2015, ISO 14001 2015, and ISO 45001 2018. Quality management, environmental management, and occupational health and safety. ISO 9001, it means that Stabex has documented processes for how fuel is received, stored, dispensed, and accounted for every station. ISO 14001, it means the company has formal systems for identifying and managing environmental risks, including underground tank leakage, fuel spills, stormwater contamination, and waste disposal. ISO 45001, that one means that every station has documented risk assessments, emergency response plans, safety procedures for handling hazardous materials, and training records for every employee who touches petroleum products. For Stabex, the certifications serve a dual purpose. They are operational governance tools that reduce theft, environmental liability, and accident risk. And they are commercial credentials that open doors with institutional buyers. I'm talking about government procurement, military supply contracts, aviation fuel supply, and UNOC trading relationships. ISO certification is the evidence. We are at the numbers, and I'm telling you guys, this is where the story is actually remarkable. In the financial year ending June 2023, Stabex ranked 7th in Kenya's petroleum market. It had 2.39% share, with sales volume of 130,792 cubic meters annually. In December 2024, its share was 2.29%. It was 8th place, but this was a 6-month figure, making direct comparison imprecise. In the third quarter of 2025, Stabex had 4th place with a 4.9% of the Kenyan market. The Petroleum Institute of East Africa, it confirmed Stabex in 4th place with 5%. Vivo Energy, Shell, it led at 14.7%. Rubis was second at 11.21%. Total Energies was third at 11.0%, and Stabex was fourth at 5%. From 7th to 4th in 2 years. from 2.39% to 5% in roughly the same period. The share nearly doubled, while the market itself was growing. Kenya's total fuel consumption, it rose by 10.7% in 2025 to 6.55 million cubic meters. Stabex captured more than its proportional share of that growth. And notably, for the first time in recent memory, the combined market share of the three traditional giants, Vivo, Rubis, and Total Energies, it fell below 50%. Stabex was one of the companies eating their market share. The company was selling over 300 million liters annually by 2019, with over 200 stations and 14 depots across 7 countries by 2025, supplying more than 550 bulk resellers, operating as one of the 3 companies distributing Uganda's national LPG program. It was also supplying the Kenya Defense Forces and fueling aircraft at JKIA and Moi International Airport. The best way to explain Stabex is that it's a regional empire. 7 countries: Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, Rwanda, Burundi, and Democratic Republic of Congo. Stabex has over 150 stations in Uganda alone as of October 2024. That's the report I read. It's in 3rd place in that market, behind Vivo Energy, Shell, at 18% and Total Energies at 16%. Imagine 3rd place in a market of over 60 licensed oil marketing companies. Stabex is succeeding where the big boys, Caltex, Gapco, Kobil Uganda, and Engen. It's succeeding where these companies failed. And these companies that I'm mentioning, they're not small operators. They are established regional brands with resources. Stabex came in as a Kenyan independent and outperformed them by understanding corridor economics, pricing competitively, maintaining product quality, and building institutional relationships at every level of the Ugandan market. The DRC operations, they are strategically important for a specific reason that has nothing to do with the current fuel demand. Hoima in Uganda, it sits at the Albertine Rift, the heart of Uganda's oil-producing region. Uganda has an estimated 6.5 billion barrels of oil in place. The East African crude oil pipeline, connecting Uganda's fields to Tanzania's Tanga port, it's the continent's most discussed energy infrastructure project. If and when Uganda becomes a significant oil producer, the distribution infrastructure for that production will flow outward from Hoima through the surrounding corridor countries. In August 2023, Chebet told President Museveni directly, Stabex International is a Pan-African company whose regional headquarters are in Nairobi, Kenya, but we are thinking that as soon as possible, when we start producing our oil in Hoima, our headquarters might move here so that we are able to distribute to a larger East and Central Africa from here. That one is not a casual conversation. Chebet is positioning Stabex to be at the center of Uganda's post-production petroleum distribution network before the production starts. He's building the relationships, the depot infrastructure in Hoima, the institutional trust with Museveni's government, and the operational capabilities that will make Stabex the natural choice when Uganda needs to move its own oil. Museveni promised to help Stabex navigate regulatory friction in Uganda, and he assigned the Vice President, Jessica Alupo, to provide assistance. A cylinder manufacturing plant was discussed. The idea was that Stabex would manufacture LPG cylinders in Uganda, adding manufacturing to its distribution and retail operations. Museveni endorsed the idea. This is just Catalina. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support my channel, the till is right here. It really helps with the editing. And I'll see you guys in the next breakdown.